difference between the man and the woman and how they are perceived would be that the man ultimately would still be considered as a multifaceted human being. He can still be sexual, but he can also be an athlete, whereas the woman is reduced to the sexual being.
Emily, first of all, overall, what do you think about provocative content? Should we be more open about it?
I think it's important to distinguish between that content being consumed and produced by adults versus by minors. They have obviously disproportionate effects, especially when you consider how early today there is exposure to that content for kids. So I think it's very difficult to determine the impact of this content being consumed at a young age and so often, because it is ultimately the first generation who is experiencing this for the first time. So it will be very difficult to measure the impact of it and to see the consequences of consuming all of this content. However, when it comes to creating the content, unfortunately, there is a lot of online grooming as a result of all of this content being produced and it being very normalized from a young age. When it comes to the sex work industry, it's important to acknowledge that sex workers absolutely deserve when it comes to their rights, to be safeguarded completely and to ensure that they are able to work in a way that is as least harmful to them as possible. However, that being said, it also needs to be acknowledged that this industry should not be glamorized to minors. That is then where there is an issue. Because when you are portraying an industry that unfortunately is a dangerous one to minors in a way that it's absolutely harmless. As with any dangerous industry, mind you, I think it should be noted that any industry that requires you to in some way make your body into a commodity, and there are multiple, not just the sex work industry, is ultimately exploitative and should not be glamorized to minors.
Self-objectification is when one perceives his or her own body as an object of others' desires. We are seeing an increase in teenagers and young people putting more emphasis and putting a price on their body and their overall image. What are the implications of this on society?
When it comes to sexual objectification, that is as old as patriarchy. It is an ancient concept.
Okay.
The difference now is that there are also cases of women taking their benefits from their body basically into their own hands as opposed to someone else's.
Exactly.
So that allows them to be more in control of how they are ultimately commodifying.
Exactly.
So let's take, for example, if you are a woman who is an athlete and you pose for a magazine cover which is in a very sexual fashion, and in the same way a man does the same thing. The difference between the man and the woman and how they are perceived would be that the man ultimately would still be considered as a multifaceted human being. He can still be sexual, but he can also be an athlete, whereas the woman is reduced to the sexual being. And explicit content, this is the issue with it. So while it might be individually empowering, and in a utopian society it would be something that would have no consequences, unfortunately, due to gender dynamics and cultural norms, there are different consequences. And this unfortunately does hinge on the media that we consume and the effects that it has on younger people within the cultural context.